Fair amount of stuff to go through tonight. Some of it you may find boring, I hope not. But there's a bit of history, and our icon there, I guess, looking back to move forward, it occurred to me, you've got to keep looking back to move forward, because if you don't, you can get lost. And that's what happens in the bush. Those who don't remember how they got there get lost. So we have to know how we got there. So the first part of the meeting, I'll go through how we've actually got to this point, and where we are, and how did we get here, and where do we go from here. And simply stated, it's all about people. It's not about responders, but it's about those responsible. And that's a big difference. The responders are doing their job, the responsible haven't been. So we'll move forward from that point. Fire services, well, where are we now? In the past, fire services used to evoke security, common purpose camaraderie, sustainability, and immense community pride. There isn't a small town in Ontario where the fire department wasn't held in high esteem. Fire responders were the most trusted people in the community. That's no longer true. It should be, but it isn't. Okay? These are falling by the wayside in current Sudbury delivery of fire services, increasingly putting people and property at risk. It currently exists as career and volunteer, which is really more appropriately called full-time and on-demand, because the career are actually full-time at the station or at their service point. The volunteers are on demand. The call goes out, they get to the fire hall, and they go. So they're an on-demand service. So it doesn't sound like much, but words mean a lot. So if career and volunteer is a problem mentally with people to adjust to, let's change it. Okay? Full-time and on-demand. Prior to the election, OTOCI put out a newsletter identifying 3 functional needs if we're going to accomplish any of those 5 critical issues. And they are critical issues. The functional needs: common sense, cultural change, and structural change. And we see this every day. Anybody that's watching what's happening in the city can't avoid seeing it. What did we get? We got platitudes and promises, and many of the candidates simply avoided the issues. Not all of them, but most of them. They let us down. They did not pick up on the real issues. Shame on them. So, what is common sense, what is cultural change, and what is structural change? Well, common sense was defined by a gentleman named Tom Paine. Bad name, Tom, but he wrote a paper called Common Sense that was the foundation of the American Declaration of Independence. And what common sense meant was that was a good judgment of the common people. And his paper outlined how that good judgment of common people was far more important than any judgment from royalty, from military dictators, from anybody. The good judgment of common people will always come to the surface and take over. We don't even recognize that today. If you talk about common sense, everybody says, well, it's not that common. That wasn't what's meant by it. It's the good judgment of people like you, people like 160,000 other in this city. That common sense would indicate that where there are obvious indicators of good judgment, you should use it. In the case, and I bring this up because the book that I have here, it's called Meltdown, and in it the authors analyze what has caused the major disasters around the world for the last 50, 75 years. But one of the disasters that they analyzed was the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan that got wiped out and destroyed by the tsunami. And interviewing the people in that company, one of the senior executives said the real problem was we lacked the humility to understand that we were not accommodating nature's power. We did computer programs that told us that, well, nature couldn't be that bad. That overrode actual stone markers on the hillsides where previous tsunamis had flooded up to. That level was 3 meters higher than the seawall that they installed for the nuclear plant. But the engineers and the corporate people, another 3 meters would have meant millions of dollars. They decided that they knew better. They ignored this common sense. Right now, Japan is paying out $188 billion to recover from that lack of humility. Common sense would have said, go and look at the stone markers and build your wall higher. They failed to exercise it. Going to the next stage, cultural change. Cultural change has been needed in our city for, well, easily since amalgamation, especially with respect to fire services. We haven't been able to marry the two volunteer and career groups peacefully without toxicity. That toxicity that's in fire services has gotten even deeper. It's now in our council. We've just watched 4 of the worst years of toxicity on council, I think, ever in the history of Sudbury. It's been absolutely horrible. We're not going to change that culture. We're not going to get people working together. We can do it. We can't do it with the way we're going right now. It's that simple. Keep in mind, this is where we came from, where we're coming from. Structural change. Local autonomous delivery of fire services to smaller urban and rural areas based on local needs is being replaced by one city, one service. It's 2 different needs. One city, one service was brought in 2001 as a policy. Unfortunately, people have believed it. They think they can do that, but they don't. We don't get one city, one service on snow plowing. Out where we live, out in the bush, if we get 8 centimeters of snow, it may be 48, 60, 72 hours before we get a plow. That doesn't happen in downtown. Within minutes, they have snow plows. So they're not even applying one city, one service to many of the services they provide. But in fire, it's very important. And as you can see, you'll see it in a bit later slide, that was one of the founding conditions of the fire optimization study. One city, one service. Structural change says we need to change that and provide the service that's needed where it's needed. And I know a number of you are going to say, well, we've been doing that for years, and yes, we have. The need to address those 3 issues was lost in political rhetoric. And it's still lost in political rhetoric. We only have one councillor here tonight, Councillor Montpellier. A situation that's very dear to his heart. His father was a in fire services, and he takes personal pride in what happens to our volunteer fire services. Where are the rest of the councillors? They all knew about this. They all got written invitation. So we have a new council coming in, and they can't even be interested enough in fire services to spend an hour here tonight. That's not a very good omen.
Telling us that we're going back to the same way we were.
Yes, we'll get there, Tony. So we'll start with I forgot to mention. Oh well. We'll start with demographics. Demographics, everybody hears the word. We all talk about it. Very few people know what demographics are in populations. All it is telling you how many people of a specific age group there are in the city. That's all it is. Okay? However, those demographics of how many people there are of an age group, say from 5 to 15 years or 10 years old, how many people? That depends on the fertility rate at the time those children were born. In 1945, at the end of the war, from there to 1965, there was a boom in the fertility rate. We had soldiers returning from war. We had the tension of the war period relieved. People got happy and they celebrated, and we had a boom in population. That boom is still with us. It's been marching forward 1 year at a time. And this isn't based on anything that I've done. This is based on world-sourced news, papers, technical papers. Everything you see tonight has come from those types of things. Those books contain all the data, and these folders, all the data that has gone into this slide presentation. Okay? There's nothing that OTOCI has made up. It's all factual. This is the fertility curve for Ontario since 1921 to 2046. And I don't know whether you can see it from back there, but from here back is historical, and this is what's projected from 2016 to 2046. That indicates the fertility curve is way below what's needed just to sustain our population. The fertility curve rate that's needed to sustain population is 2.1 children per woman in their lifetime. Now, if you have women with 6 children or 4 children, that means some women can get away with none, but the average of 2.1 per woman per lifetime is needed just to sustain a population. As you can see, we're down at about 1.5 or less. We can't sustain our population based on birth rate. It's impossible. So, what is the solution? Well, our politicians will tell you, oh, we'll bring in immigrants. Sounds great. Really terrific. That's the way we can bolster it. And really, that decline in fertility rate was the end product of the pill which came in 1960, and family planning really got its roots. So good a roots that now we can't even sustain our own population. However, we're not the only ones. This is what's been happening in the world to the fertility rate. 1960, the same boom. 2021, it's down to a little over 2.1. They're just barely making it worldwide. That isn't just Canada, it isn't just Sudbury, it isn't just Ontario. That's a world birth rate. That's done by the United Nations Population Division in 2022, sorry. That's current. It's from the United Nations. Can you trust them? We don't have any better numbers. So, the world isn't able to sustain its own population right now. What does this mean? Well, there's a lot of talk out there that amalgamation has caused the problems we have. Well, it hasn't. Amalgamation was brought in 2001. Okay? So if we take a look at the 1991 population, under 65-year-olds was 144,390. 2021, it's only 132,000. We have 12,000 fewer young people in our community today than we had in 1991. That's because the birth rate isn't there. If we take a look at the over 65, in 1991 there was 16,820. In 2021 there's 33,775. We have close to 17,000 more people over 65. That tells you a lot, because those people are out of the workforce. They affect taxes, because now they're on fixed incomes. They don't have as much disposable income at their fingertips to spend. But that's grown by 17,000. And our youth has dropped by 12,000. And you'll see this on a curve in a minute. That wasn't amalgamation that did that. Amalgamation had nothing to do with birth rates, or death rates, or where the population was, how they were getting older. People simply got older. However, none of that has been addressed by amalgamation. We brought in amalgamation, we brought all these towns together, but we never addressed what was happening to our population. We elected politicians who had their own special interests, and they pursued those and never thought about the community. So, what has happened? Okay, the young people less than 15 years old don't give us any tax revenue. Those young people, though, since 1991 has dropped by 12,000. Where they were not, our birth rate and our fertility rate is not there. Minimal tax revenue went from 51,000 to 41,795. That's the people between 15 and 40 years old. Maximum tax revenue went from 46,000 to 56,000. That's the 40 years old to 65 years old. And you'll see why that went up in a moment. Fixed income went from 16,820 to 33,000. It doubled. That's people getting older and moving into retirement. That only reflects basically from those years the plus 65, but you have to realize in today's world, plus 55s, many of them are moving into retirement, and plus 60s. So that's taken even more out of our workforce. So our workforce pool, and this is the population that you draw your workforce from. It isn't the workforce, it's the population you can draw your workforce from. Went from 111,000 down to 106,000. We lost 5,000 in that pool. That means that we got far fewer people to draw from for our workforce. So, what do? We're going to get immigrants? Well, you just saw the world curve. I don't know where we'll get the immigrants from. So, none of that, though, has been addressed by our governments. As that is happening, we should be adjusting our spending habits to know that we aren't going to have the income base to afford what they're spending. They haven't been doing that. Political influence has failed to recognize and install management structures compatible with population trending. They tried to take over everything. They took over volunteer fire services. They took over arenas. They took over community centers that the individual communities built. Those all went into the big city to manage more efficiently. Well, we all know how well that worked. So this is what happened between 1991 and 2021. And as you can see here, each of these blocks is 2,000 people. Each of these is a 5-year block. Okay? So if you count the blocks from regional government to CGS, there's 5 blocks, and if you look at the difference, there's about a little over 2,000, let's say 2,000 difference between 91 and 2021. That's 10,000 people that dropped out of that age group. They're not there anymore. They're not going to be available for us to hire and boost industry, for us to attract industry. And this is not just us. This is worldwide. Where are we going to get people to fill that? And we're not. So we have to temper our financial demands to fit the population that we are going to have. On top of that, between 1970 and 1995, starting with individual communities up until regional government, but continued by regional government up until 95, the city built 24 stations in 25 years. They had a population coming in that followed the black line. No problem getting volunteers, no problem getting workers for the industry. If you got workers for the industry, you got good tax revenues, they could afford to do it. Today, you could not do that. It just simply would not be possible because you do not have the workforce, you do not have the tax revenues. As I said, all stations were built and maintained prior to CGS. In 2001, the star at the top there, CGS, that was the amalgamation. Since amalgamation, they've not maintained. They deferred maintenance every year since amalgamation. We have now deferred more than $3.2 billion worth of maintenance on city assets. And you guys all know that. You drive down the roads every day, you see the conditions of them. You go into city buildings, you see the conditions of them, the fire halls, the police. Like, we just have not maintained our assets. Okay? To see the progression, 1996 is the brown line at the top. By 2011, we were at the blue line. That baby boom bubble was in the 44, 45-year-olds to the 60-year-olds. By 2021, a big part of that has moved over into the plus 65. And if you take a look at 2031, which is a projected one based on what's been happening here, that baby boom is going to be out of the workforce pool. We're going to have a workforce pool considerably lower than what we have today. Every country, every province, every town, every continent will have the same problem, as you've already seen. The under 65 cohort, as I say, it's dropped by 12,500. The over 65 cohort has increased by 14,530. That's 14,500 on fixed income. It's 12,000 less that's going to be available as a workforce. That's the bottom line of it. These are not our numbers. These did not come from OTOCI. These came from Census Canada. Census Canada does a census every 5 years. That's where these numbers come from. We're not making anything up. There's always some people who say, oh, well, these are your numbers and you don't know what you're talking about. Well, this is not me talking. This is Census Canada telling us this. If we're too stubborn and lack humility to listen, guess where we're headed? Tonight, there should have been 13 people here from council. Guess where we're headed? And we don't have to guess. We know. In addition to that, within the city of Greater Sudbury, there's been migration. The top line up there is from 1996 to 2006 to 2016. Those are the populations that dropped from 1996 to 2006, and we've regained a bit. All of that gain, though, has been in the plus 65s. If we take a look at the former city, that's this line, and the former small towns and urban areas, 91,000 down to 85,007. It's been declining in population. All of the outer communities, 70,800 to 75,800, have been increasing their populations by 5,000. So Sudbury has dropped by 4,000. The others have increased by between 2006 and 2016, not between, okay, by 7,800. Migration is also changing the demographics. The age distribution within each of those communities is changing. You can see it in your own communities. You know there's far more young people in your community wandering around than there was 10 years ago. We see it particularly profoundly in Ward 2 out in Lively. The number of young people is gone up. You're in front of the camera, Counselor. Just have a chair.
Okay, I'll move over. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Have a chair. I'll continue once you're seated. You're still going to be in front of him unless you move behind. That's it. Thank you. That move is not generated by anything sinister. What it is, those older people who are moving out of the smaller communities and moving into apartments, seniors' homes, and that are leaving behind lower cost housing. The younger people in the city can see, and they can go to Lively and buy a house that would be $500,000 in Sudbury for $300,000 in Lively. Yes, it's smaller. It's what most of us here would have called a starter home in our younger days. But then they get used to living there and all the conveniences. They don't want to leave then. So those communities now are growing, new housing going up. So at the same time as all of that is happening, Fire Services response has been to go to lower coverage in the growth area, which is the outer areas where all the people are going, and increase the coverage in the shrinkage area. If you've got 100 firemen in the city proper at 110,000 or whatever, and that population shrinks to 90,000 with the same number of firemen still, you've just increased the coverage in that part of the city. If you take away firemen from the outer area but increase the population, you've just shrunk the coverage in that area at the same time as the population is growing. This is particularly interesting with respect to the the fire optimization, which I'll get into shortly. Right now, I said there would be a break. I've just covered the population demographics. Fire Services is up next. If you like, we can take a 5-minute break, or you're a small group. If you want to continue on, I will continue on. Does anybody want a break? Oh, good. Thank you.
Just like the council meeting, 9 o'clock or 1 more.
There's a reason that I made that 5 minutes, by the way. And the reason for it, whoop, I went the wrong way there, is flashover time in Fire Services. And we're getting into Fire Services now. Flashover time has shrunk. And if you take a look at the, I'll enlarge that a bit so you can see it. If you take a look at flashover times here, the shortest time to flashover in modern housing is about 3 to 5 minutes. In the past, flashover time was close to 30 minutes. That means that you had 30 minutes to safely get out of your house, in all probability, in most home fires. Today, you have 3 to 5 minutes to get out of your house. At that point, you're in danger of longest time to flash over is 5 minutes. Time to collapse of the floor is about 12 minutes now. That used to be close to an hour, 45 minutes. Time to collapse a protected floor now is about just under 30 minutes, and it used to be almost 2 hours. What do they mean by that? Well, in a home, and I'll just switch to the bottom here. In the homes that we have nowadays, we have larger homes to start with. We have open geometrics in the home. That means that there's less dividing walls. It's the open concept. Okay? There's nothing there to stop the spread from one room to the next. Kitchen, dining room, living room, it's all open. Okay? Shorter time to flash over. That comes from building materials, and it comes from furnishings. Most of the furnishings in new homes, the flashover time is very rapid. In the past, a lot of it was cotton, a lot of it was wool, it was solid wood, it wasn't particle board. And a good example is when they talk new construction materials here. These are floor joists today, okay? There's a solid piece of wood at the top and one at the bottom. In between, there's a web of laminated wood, and it's glued together. Okay? Then there's a piece of solid wood at the top and bottom glued to that. When that glue reaches 70 degrees Celsius, it softens and you no longer have the structural strength. In the past, you had solid wood beams there, 2x6s, 2x8s, 2x10s, depending on the heft or what you had on the floor above. That wood had a strength for over an hour. Now, within the time it takes to bring the temperature up to 70 degrees C, you lose the strength. It's unsafe to enter those homes. 3 to 5 minutes, it's unsafe. Now, you hear a lot about fire protection and fire prevention and everything else. And what this organization says about that, there's one significant contributing factor is the lack of understanding of fire behavior in residential structures resulting from the changes that have been taking place in several components. Well, that's furnishings, it's the wood beams, it's all that. The changing dynamics of residential fires as a result of the changes in home size, geometry, contents, and construction period materials over the past 50 years add complexity to fire behavior. That isn't the end of the story. Okay? Additionally, on average, firefighters in the U.S. receive less than 1% of their training on the subject of fire behavior. And there's 3 or 4 people here from Beaver Lake who can attest to this. In one meeting with fire services in Beaver Lake, CAO Archer claimed responsibility. He was ultimately responsible for fire protection. And I called him out on it. I said, you aren't. The people that live in these buildings are responsible for fire protection. If they don't do things to protect themselves, all you can do as CAO is respond to the fire. That's what you're responsible for. But the people are responsible for prevention. He didn't have an answer. So that's one of the things that's been changing. But what that means is, if you build a house to today's standards, and we recently had a case out on High Falls Road, fire burned to the ground, or a house burned to the ground, brand new, almost new house, burnt to the ground. Some of the fire trucks took 40 minutes to get there. Okay? It's not their fault. It's not their fault that they didn't have time. Some of the trucks got there faster, but they were ill-equipped. But the bottom line was, it was made with today's building materials. It wouldn't have mattered if they'd got there earlier, because they couldn't get there fast enough to save it. You cannot, from the point of ignition to getting the trucks at the site, you cannot do it in under 5 minutes. It could be 2 or 3 minutes before you even detect a fire. So what are we dealing with in fire services? We talk about response times. Response times don't mean anything anymore. So why do we keep looking at locations relative to response time? That's what we're doing. We're paying good money for it too. And incidentally, I don't know how many watched the council meeting the other night, but it came out in the council meeting that this study from England is not a complete study. Our own fire services now have to add their portion. What are we going to get this time? I don't know. And it came out, and everybody, all of the councillors and everybody were clamoring that we need an audit. Came out in the meeting on Tuesday evening by the fire chief of emergency services, Joe Nichols, stated that it was paid for out of an audit grant from the provincial government. The provincial government gave them money to do an audit. They spent it on a British fire study. That type of thing's got to stop. Brief history. Prior to 73, and the main point here, it's a little bit of words, but care, custody, and control of fire departments were residential in every community. Care, custody, and control did not depend on somebody 40 kilometers away in City Hall. It was done in the community where the protection was needed. 73 to 97, the former system of full-time and on-demand services continued and is still stayed with care, custody, and control residing in each community, even in regional government. Okay? Interesting thing, up until 1999, there was $1 million in 1999 for maintenance in the regional government budget. In 2001 forward, there is no maintenance dollars in any of the budgets. That tells you a lot. In 1997, the Ontario government enacted the Ontario Fire Protection and Prevention Act, and they recognized operational control as more important than administration and decreed that a fire chief is the person who is ultimately responsible to the council of the municipality that appointed him or her for delivery of fire protection service. By making that fire chief responsible directly to council, that also made council directly responsible for fire services. Not administration, not a managerial system in a corporation, but the council. Okay? 2001 to present, care, custody, and control of the fire services was granted to by the Ontario government to CGS Council. Councils have tried to shed those responsibilities to corporate administration, and right now, care has been minimal annually for 23 years, deferring maintenance. Custody now resides with CGS corporate administration. Control is now OTOCI and resides within CGS corporate administration. However, legislated responsibility remains with council. Council has the liability for ensuring that fire protection is done right, not the corporation. But we put the corporation in the fire services in the corporation. On-demand assets have been looted or abandoned. Volunteerism felt a need to organize into a union in 2013, thus formalizing the toxicity. The toxicity was there before that, well before that. In fact, in 2001 it was already there. It's never improved. It looks a little bit better now, but it's just under the surface. So where are we? Well, with the exception of one fire hall, that was the fire halls that our communities built because of need. Okay? They needed one in Beaver Lake, so they built it. They equipped it, they got volunteers, they had a fire department to respond quickly. They needed one in Vermilion Lake, they did the same thing. They needed one in Whitefish, they did the same thing. And that's true of all of these. The only one that it isn't true is the one in the center up here, which is Val Thorez. It was not built due to need, although it was perceived as a need, and the need was perceived to be that they would build Val Thorez and shut down Hanmer and Valcairn. Well, they never shut down Valcairn or Hanmer, and Val Thorez now is there as a composite station at considerable cost. So those were all built for need. How do you get better than having a fire station in a location where it's needed? We've done I don't know how many studies on fire station locations. We've never changed these. But why do we keep studying the locations? Like, we know where the need is. It's been there for 60 years. Additional to that, and I love this map, these are the level railway crossings in the greater city of Sudbury. Does this impact directly on fire services? Not daily, but there is an impact. There are certain key ones that should have had grade separation. There's one in Capriol. On Yonge Street in Capriol, that crossing should be a grade separation. The fire department is on one side and the town is on the other. The residential is on the same side as the fire hall, but the businesses are on the other side. If there's a transcontinental train going through, CN, and I believe there's up to 17 of those go through in a day, you can be held up there for 20 minutes. So if you have a fire in the downtown, the truck comes roaring along, there's a train just started the crossing, what do? They wait 20 minutes? Our answer to that by the city was that you call the station guy or the yard guy. No, they gave them the number of the dispatcher in Toronto. The fire crew is supposed to call the dispatcher in Toronto, who calls the yard guy, who gets somebody to go out and lead the fire truck around the end of the train to save building a grade separation. Unbelievable. Anyhow, not all of these need grade separation. Some of them have an alternative route around, some of them don't. If there's an alternative route, and thanks to gentleman Mr. Leduc here, informed me the other day that we used to have a practice where those conditions existed. They would actually call out two stations. One who may have to cross the track, and if there was a train, the other one could still get there. If he got to the tracks and there was no train, he would call off or ask the other station to stand down. Perfect. We don't do that anymore either. So again, our protectionism is failing us. So what did we see on the map from England? Well, those with the red circles on are the ones that will remain according to that map. This one here is at Whitefish, and MR55 out to Highway 17 and out is how they get to the west. Okay? MTO is planning on closing that interconnection there, that you won't be able to go west from Highway 55. You will have to come from that fire station down, around, and back up, or go up, around, and back down. Okay? You won't be able to take 55. Has that been taken into account in the British study? I don't know. I have no idea. But I do know that if they do that, we have a problem. Because What they're indicating of fire services is that that station is going to disappear. They also have indicated that Red Deer Lake Station has already disappeared. Okay. They're going to be either in Wanapitei or in Coniston. Well, the CN, the transcontinental train, crosses between there. And again, what do? When they get to the track and they got to wait 20 minutes, and everybody's crossed that track on Highway 17 going east. Okay? So you know when there's a train crossing, you can sit there a fair amount of time. If you're a resident waiting for a fire response or an ambulance, that's a long time. Even worse, if you're sitting in a fire truck and you know lives are depending on you to get there quickly and you have to sit and wait for 20 minutes for a train to go across, how would you feel? That's got to be one of the highest stress situations you can imagine. I need to get there to help those people, but I can't. We talk about PTSD. That is one of the worst instigators of PTSD that I can think of. You have the equipment, you have the ability, you have everything going, but you can't get there because there's a train crossing the road. Shame on us. When they do this, we leave huge areas without coverage. This green is the city of Greater Sudbury. So this whole area. Now, if they put that station here and the track is here, this whole area then is without coverage except from Long Lake, which is over here. If he's going out to there, he comes down here, goes across, and by the golly, that CN train now is crossing that road. How can they arbitrarily, in England, say that we can eliminate one of those stations? They have no idea about the trains, or if they have, the fire services certainly hasn't shared it with us. Station 16 in Val Thorez, that's the newest station in our assemblage of stations. In 2017, it required twice the capital of any of the volunteer stations to bring it up to maintained standards, sustainable maintenance. Twice the capital of any volunteer station. Stations 1, 2, 3, and 4 were also almost twice, well, some of them were more than twice, the capital required to bring them up to standard. They're all career stations. Downtown, those 4 career stations, and we also have the volunteer station in Coppercliff, are all within 10 kilometers of each other. They plan to eliminate the Coppercliff one, leaving 4 stations within 10 kilometers of each other. In 2017, there was 103 career responders. The stations they were in required $28 million to do repairs, and that's all from the fire optimization study. I did not make any of that up. Those numbers are theirs. 2017, the population in Sudbury per career responder was 825. 12 other communities across Ontario had 1,061 residents per career fireman. Does this mean anything? It may or it may not. Unless you know the actual conditions within the community, you can't say that we are overstaffed on career. They may be doing things the others aren't. So it would be unfair for us because we don't have that information. Okay? To demonstrate, this is the chart that was in the optimization study, and in it, Greater Sudbury was number 12. Okay? Because they had used 161,000 as the population serviced by the career firemen. Now I've corrected that in that chart. 85,000 in the city, served by 103 career firemen. That gives you 825 citizens per career. Again, as I say, is this right or wrong? I don't know, we can't tell. We don't have the information. They don't serve it to us. They don't give it to us. It's all in secret. You can't be allowed to know. You may do something subversive with it. I may. Why is it secret? What is it they do? I mean, everybody else knows in other cities and towns. Anyhow, that's our city. So, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Well, let's remove the toxicity issues from the performance. There's hundreds of full-time and on-demand organizations working effectively and cooperatively in adjacent communities across North America. Why can't we do the same internally? Why can't our volunteers work in cooperation with our career? Well, a big part of the problem is our policy of one city, one service. And Deputy Fire Chief in 2017 was quoted by CBC as saying, it really speaks to one city, one service model, and it speaks to one city, one service taxation. Mark's grinning, yeah, it's about money. Anyhow, bad quote. We can, if city separates the departmental management into two equally competent service departments with separate chains of accountability directly to council. One city, two services, forget one city, one service. If neighboring communities with full-time and on-demand differences work effectively, efficiently, and cooperative, there's no reason we can't do that internally. There are some arguments against doing that. This is the model that the Ontario Fire Act is based on. Having the full-time fire chief or a fire chief reporting directly to council, each station having separate costs so that each fire chief or fire captain knows what his station's costing and what his responders are doing, and using administration for the administrative functions only. The operational functions were to be through the fire chief to council. Accountability for those operational functions were to be through the fire chief to council. And that is still in place in the Ontario Fire Act, by the way. We had input from one individual who said, well, you can't have two fire departments. So if we have a fire chief for the on-demand responders, this is all that would happen. And that's just the same as two communities side by side, one volunteer, one career, and they both use the same administration. Why can't it work? And quite frankly, our system is at a point at this stage in time where it's probably the only thing that's going to get us out of it. Mutual aid between them. Yeah, that works. And the individual who claimed that we can't have them, the Ontario Fire Act in 1997 said that fire departments, the council of a municipality may establish more than one fire department for the municipality. Page 7 out of 53 of the Fire Act. There is a conditional clause added to that at that time, and keep in mind this was prior to amalgamation, okay, that any community that had a full-time career department a year before that act came into vogue or was enacted could not have two departments. Okay, so if you said the city of Sudbury could have two departments, it would not be allowed. But that got wiped out with the City of Sudbury Act in 2001, because now the city of Greater Sudbury did not have exclusively career in the fire department. They had career and volunteer. We can now have two departments. Okay? That would solve a lot of problems for us. Wouldn't solve all our problems. There would be a lot of work required to make it happen. Yes. Is it worth the effort? We believe it is. Our Towns, Our City says, yeah, it's worth the effort. If we can get a fire department or two fire departments that can work with each other without toxicity, without continually having to study locations, without continually having to do all this stuff, it's worth the effort, every bit. And who knows, that camaraderie may reestablish, and maybe it will overflow into council. We can only hope. So, fire services, the time's now. Maximize our workforce availability that exists. We don't have a big workforce availability anymore because of those demographic curves you saw. So what's going to be increasingly important, and not just in fire services, is the fact that we have people in full-time employment in industry and that who are willing to serve as volunteers, in this case in fire services, in nursing, paramedics, road crews, all kinds of things. We're going to have to do that because you saw the curve. We're going to run out of people. So let's get ready. Let's start doing it now. Because when those last baby boomers move into retirement, it's going to come as a pretty big shock on our tax bills. It can't help but come as a big shock on our tax bills. And it's not effective. Apply expertise to maximize effectiveness and efficiency. Put the training where it's needed. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the current trend to, we have to have a training department. So we go out and hire trainers. These are experts at training. They have no clue what the people, they are training do every day, but they're expert trainers. Fine, you can have that. Train them on the theory that way. But their real training has to come from mentorship within the workplace. That's where you gain the education. And you cannot possibly write all that down in a book that somebody in front of a computer can say, hey, I've got my training now. It doesn't work that way. And it isn't going to work that way. So let's get back to the theoretical, but also, and a good example is, if you have a company and you need some welders, and you can't get experienced welders, what do? You go out and you hire a guy who wants to be a welder, and he's done the preliminary work and he's got qualified in a few things. You hire him and you put him to working for an experienced welder. He serves an apprenticeship, and he learns from the experience of the older people. Okay? You end up with a good welder. Same applies in fire service. Why would you have somebody who's never fought a fire training firefighters? It makes no sense. The common sense is not there. The common people like us, we know it makes no sense. Nobody listens. Appropriate technology. Technology suited to the social, environmental, and economic conditions of the geographic area which is applied is sound management, promotes self-sufficiency, and sustainable. Having ladder trucks in Beaver Lake makes no sense whatsoever. Ladder trucks in Beaver Lake are not appropriate technology. Bush trucks in downtown Sudbury are not appropriate technology. And in this, I would just like to, and I probably shouldn't do this, but I will, it's a small group. One of the things on that map from the to shut down, or that's what they have on their map, shut down Skeed Fire Station, Garson Fire Station, and where's this one? Oh no, that's Falconbridge, and probably maintain the Garson one. The city has just bought just under $500,000 heavy water rescue boat. If they shut down Skeed, where are they going to keep that boat? Downtown Sudbury? There's no other fire stations on heavy water. So where are they going to keep that $400,000 boat. They're going to park it out at Skeed, and when the fire goes off and they got a problem in Whitewater Lake, they rush out to Skeed, get the boat out of the water, and take it to Whitewater? Are they going to park it on dry land? Like, there's something wrong with the thinking here. This does not.
Do you suggest that in England, or is this Sudbury?
No, that's Sudbury. That's Sudbury. Getting rid of Skeed, in fact, I think it's almost shut down now. There's very little going on out there. So, but I just thought I would bring that point up because when you're talking about appropriate technology, oh, I'm way back. Okay. Appropriate technology, that raises a big question. We've got 300 lakes in this city. At least 5 of them are heavy water. Okay? The county of Haldimand in southern Ontario has 2 fire stations on heavy water. They have 2 heavy water rescue boats. They have 2 other fire stations on the Grand River. They have light water rescue boats, all within 10 kilometers of each other. That's a totally volunteer fire service. Okay? But the point I'm making is put the technology where it's needed. With today's technology and IT stuff, we should be able to, the dispatcher should be able to know that there's a train crossing that route. Why not? And send the truck the other way. We don't do that. All we have to do is work with the railways. It simply takes a barcode reader and a signal back to a central point. Computer works it all out for you. But we don't do it. The technology's there and it's appropriate. Anyhow, so what now? The time is now to stop studying locations that have worked effectively for about 30 years. They're well positioned to do so for another 30 years and get on with bringing those stations up to the standards they should be. Station standards, management restructured to provide respect and pride that on-demand responders deserve, and working arrangements with their employers has very high potential to recover what's been destroyed. Working arrangements with their employers simply means you work out an agreement with the volunteer's employer that, hey, if we have a fire that he's in a position to respond to, we will pay you your charge-out rate for that employee while he's off fighting the fire. And we'll pay you to you out of our taxes. So you don't lose money as a company. This is in your best interest and it's in our best interest. Because if they're needed at your fire, you have them as well. And that's all it takes. Yes, there are a lot of details on how you do it through union contracts and everything else. Once you hit the start button, those can all be worked out. So, fire services, and we initially, OTOCI, planned to present this as one possibility. However, we believe that the citizens of Greater Sudbury have been investing far more in location studies and have been waiting 23 years longer than should have been needed. Therefore, we believe it's time for citizens to advocate to their councillors to resolve the issue and direct staff to move on the foregoing suggested creation of 2-department fire service model immediately. And that is the end of our presentation.